I was bone-tired when I pulled off the winding mountain road, my SUV tires crunching over the familiar gravel of the driveway that led to my grandmother's old cabin, a place I'd spent the better part of my inheritance restoring into my personal sanctuary. After nearly a year spent coordinating clinical trials overseas, long hours, crowded airports, hotel rooms that all blurred into one, I had dreamed of this return. I had imagined pulling into the quiet, stepping into the smell of pine and old wood, and breathing air that didn't taste like jet fuel or hospital disinfectant. I needed this place more than I'd ever needed anything. So when I saw the sleek, black luxury SUV parked directly in front of my porch, the first feeling wasn't confusion, it was violation. A cold, sharp kind that tightened in my chest like a fist. It wasn't just any car. This thing had dealership tags, tinted windows, spotless chrome rims, and didn't belong on my property. My fingers curled tighter around the steering wheel as I eased to a stop behind it. I sat there for a moment, not moving, the engine idling low, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe someone took a wrong turn. Maybe a hiker, lost or injured, found their way here. But this wasn't a place people just stumbled upon. My cabin was secluded, deliberately so. The road was poorly marked. GPS barely worked out here. You had to know exactly where you were going. I turned off the engine and stepped out, gravel shifting under my boots. The air smelled like pine needles and melting snow, but none of it calmed me now. That unease only grew when I noticed the new welcome mat sitting in front of the door. Not the plain one I'd left there, a generic, dirt-streaked slab I picked up from Home Depot years ago. This one was new, with a floral design and the word home printed in delicate script. My hand instinctively moved to my pocket where I kept the spare cabin key, but I already knew. Whoever was inside hadn't broken in. They had a key, which meant they had access. I approached slowly, my boots heavy on the old wood steps. The porch was swept clean, fresher than I'd ever left it. A terracotta pot filled with mums, bright, vibrant, sat to the left of the door. I stared at the mat again, then to the SUV, then back to the door. It was cracked open. A faint trail of music, soft piano notes, floated from inside. My heart thudded, not from fear exactly, but something rawer. Anger, confusion, betrayal. I pushed the door open without knocking. The smell hit me first. Lavender candles, cinnamon, the unmistakable scent of someone who'd not just visited but lived here for a while. The furniture was rearranged. The throw blanket folded neatly on the couch wasn't mine. There was a pair of women's boots by the fireplace. A coat hanging on the back of the kitchen chair. The hardwood floors had been polished, the kitchen counter scrubbed, the windows clean. My throat tightened as I took it all in. Someone had been living here. Comfortably. Confidently. And then I heard her voice, light, singing along softly to the music, coming from down the hallway that led to the bedrooms. The sound stopped me cold. That voice was unmistakable. Even after years of silence between us, even after the shouting matches, the tearful calls that ended mid-sentence, and the silence that followed, I knew that voice. "Emily," I said, my voice dry, barely louder than a whisper, but it sliced through the quiet like a gunshot. There was a pause. Then rapid footsteps. She appeared in the hallway, wearing one of my old sweatshirts, gray, oversized, with a faded Denver University logo across the front. Her hair was longer than I remembered, darker, and her eyes wide with that same innocent shock she'd always used like a shield. "Rachel?" she said, like I was the intruder. My jaw clenched. I took a step forward. "What the hell are you doing here?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. That hesitation, typical Emily. Always waiting to gauge the temperature of the room before deciding how to react. But I wasn't giving her time. I'd spent nearly a year looking forward to returning to this place. My place. The only place that still felt untouched by the world I'd been grinding through. And now it was tainted. "You've been living here," I said, my voice low, steady. "This is my cabin. You had no right." Rachel, I didn't know when you were coming back," she said quickly. "I thought, after everything, you'd be gone longer. I didn't think you'd." That's not an answer. I moved past her, into the hallway. The guest room door was open. My grandmother's room, the one I hadn't touched since she passed, was wide open too. Fresh sheets. Her old photo frames replaced with newer pictures. Emily with friends I didn't know. Emily with some guy. A dog. My stomach turned. "How long?" I asked. I couldn't look at her now. "How long have you been here?" Her voice was quiet behind me. 5 months. I turned slowly.
5
Months. She nodded, like she was ashamed, but I wasn't sure if it was real. Emily had always been good at that, looking broken just enough to draw sympathy. How did you even get in? I changed the locks after the funeral. Mom gave me the old set, she said quickly. I didn't know you changed them until I tried, and Rachel, I was going through some stuff, okay? I had nowhere else. I lost my job. My lease ended. I was crashing on couches. This place was empty. It was mine, I snapped. It wasn't empty. It was waiting for me. She flinched. I just needed a break. So you took mine. Silence stretched between us. She shifted her weight, her arms crossed over her chest like she was trying to shield herself. I cleaned. I kept it nice. I paid for the propane and electricity. Did you think that made it okay? Her lips parted like she wanted to answer, but nothing came out. I turned back into the room and stared at the photo of her and the dog on the dresser. I didn't know she even liked dogs. The disconnect felt too big, too wide to cross. Emily, I said, my voice calmer now. Too calm maybe. You can't stay here. She stepped into the room behind me. I know. I was going to leave before you came back. But you didn't. I didn't know when. You never told anyone. Because it wasn't their business. I could feel her gaze on my back, but I couldn't look at her. I wasn't ready to see whatever face she was wearing now. Remorseful, hurt, defensive. I didn't care. This place was supposed to be a clean start, I said quietly. For me, not for you. You don't just get to claim it when it's convenient. I wasn't trying to take it, she said, but her voice sounded weak, like even she didn't believe it. I turned to her one last time. You have until the end of the week. Then I want you out. Her face crumpled, but I walked past her before I could see the tears fall. If they were even real. The mountain air didn't feel as clean as it had when I first stepped out of the car. And as I stood on the porch, staring at the unfamiliar SUV, that new doormat, the pot of cheerful mums beside the door, it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place I had to take back.
Piece by piece.
Room by room. And I wasn't sure how much of it I could salvage. Emily met me at the door, like she lived there. She didn't even flinch when she saw the look on my face, didn't stammer or show the smallest hint of guilt. She just stood there barefoot, dressed in a pair of my old leggings and one of my faded college sweatshirts, hood down, hair pulled into a messy bun like she'd just come back from a yoga class she was too relaxed to finish. In one hand, she held the navy ceramic mug with a crack in the handle that I'd bought at a Denver flea market 6 years ago, the same one I always used when I needed comfort. She took a slow sip from it, the steam curling around her nose as she smiled. That smile made my skin crawl. It wasn't nervous or apologetic. It was warm, casual, like I was a guest at my own doorstep. Morning, she said, like we'd seen each other yesterday. I thought I heard your car. I stepped over the threshold, refusing to return her smile. I could smell the coffee now, my special blend, the beans I used to order from a little shop in Boulder, the ones I kept sealed in a labeled mason jar on the second shelf above the sink. The scent would have comforted me, but in that moment, it just burned. She turned and walked toward the kitchen without waiting for a response, like this was a routine, like she belonged here. Her bare feet padded across the hardwood with confidence, each step a reminder that this space had somehow stopped being mine the moment I left. I figured you'd be back soon, she called over her shoulder as she leaned against the counter and topped off her coffee. But I thought you'd text or something. Text? I could barely breathe. I moved into the living room, my eyes scanning every detail. The blanket thrown over the couch wasn't mine. It was some mustard-colored knit thing I'd never seen before. One of my throw pillows was missing. The floor was swept, and the coasters were rearranged. My books had been shifted on the shelves, some replaced entirely with titles I wouldn't touch if I were trapped on a desert island. A half-finished bottle of white wine sat on the end table, right next to my grandmother's antique lamp, which now had a different lampshade. I couldn't even process it all. Every room I glanced into had been subtly altered. The small, lived-in details I had carefully built into the retreat had been overlaid with her version of what home looked like someone had painted over my memories with pastel gloss and candlelight. Emily held out the coffee mug to me with a grin. Want some? It's the Sumatra stuff, the one you always get. I found your stash. Hope you don't mind. I didn't take it. I didn't move. I stared at her, at the casual way she leaned against my granite countertop, her hips resting against the edge like she had cooked breakfast there every morning for the past year. Maybe she had. "You're drinking my coffee," I said, my voice low, trembling not with fear, but with a rage I was working very hard to keep contained. "Wearing my clothes. Living in my house. And you thought I'd be okay with it?" Her smile faltered, but only for a second. She tilted her head, like I was the one being dramatic. "Rachel, come on. It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" I asked. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like you moved in without asking and took over everything I built." She shrugged and sipped her coffee again, slower this time. "It was just for a while. I needed a break, that's all. After my last place, things were complicated." Complicated. That was her word for failure. Emily had burned through 3 failed business ventures in the past 4 years. First, there was the hand-poured candle line, ridiculously overpriced and poorly marketed. Then a failed attempt at a travel blog that turned into a GoFundMe for a van she never bought. And most recently, a startup app for emotional accountability that never made it past the sketchpad phase. She had a knack for setting fires behind her and walking away without looking back. And now she'd done it again. Only this time the ashes were smoldering in my living room. "You didn't even ask," I said, my voice sharper now. "You waited until I left the country, and then what? Just packed up and moved in like you owned the place." She set the mug down a little too loudly on the counter and crossed her arms. "It wasn't like that, okay? I didn't plan it. My lease ended, and I was couch surfing for a while. Then Mom mentioned the cabin and how you were out of the country for work. I figured it would be empty. I just needed somewhere quiet to think, clear my head." "Clear your head," I repeated, stepping closer, my voice colder. "You cleared out my pantry. You cleared off my bookshelves. You moved furniture, Emily. This wasn't a weekend stay. You've lived here." "I cleaned," she said, as if that mattered. "I kept it nice. I've been paying the bills." "What bills?" I snapped. "The utilities I already auto-pay for my account? You're drinking my coffee in a house I bought with my inheritance that you never even asked to be in." Emily's jaw tensed. She leaned back against the sink, staring at the window above it, like maybe it would give her an answer she hadn't thought of yet. "I didn't think you'd care," she muttered finally. "You were gone. You didn't say when you'd be back." "That's because it wasn't your business," I said. "It's my life. My space. You don't get to just fill it because it's convenient for you." Her eyes flicked toward mine. There was something there, resentment maybe, or embarrassment twisted into pride. "I wasn't squatting," she said, defensively now. "I was taking care of it, making sure it didn't go to waste." I wanted to scream. My hands balled into fists at my sides. "This place wasn't abandoned, Emily. I built it to be a home. My home. Not your backup plan when your latest project crashed and burned." The room felt suddenly too small. Her mug sat on the counter like a symbol of every boundary she'd trampled over. I could see the crumbs on the cutting board from whatever breakfast she'd made that morning. A Spotify playlist was open on my iPad next to the stove, a yoga mix full of soft piano and acoustic covers. Her entire existence had seeped into every inch of my space, as if she'd been trying to erase me, not just borrow the walls. "You need to start packing," I said finally, the anger gone now, replaced with cold certainty. "You shouldn't be here. And you know it." Emily looked away. Her arms were still crossed, her mouth drawn in a tight line. She didn't argue.
Not yet.
But as I turned and walked down the hallway toward my bedroom, dreading what else I would find, I realized something even more infuriating than the intrusion itself. She'd been waiting for me to find out. She knew this wasn't right. She just didn't care. It happened so casually, as if she was showing me a new haircut or a set of throw pillows she picked up on sale. Emily stood in the doorway between the hallway and the kitchen, smiling with a kind of giddy satisfaction I hadn't seen on her face in years, and gestured grandly, like she was about to unveil some grand artistic achievement. "Tada," she said, her voice light, cheerful, almost smug. I didn't understand what I was supposed to be looking at until I stepped in fully and my stomach dropped so hard it left me dizzy. The kitchen I had poured myself into, piece by piece, over months of weekends with sandpaper in one hand and varnish in the other, was gone. Completely. Obliterated. The rustic pine cabinets I had restored myself from my grandmother's original 1970s set, which I'd lovingly stripped, stained, and sealed, were nowhere in sight. In their place were stark white Shaker-style cabinets, glossy and sterile, the kind you see in magazines with names like Modern Chalet or Aspen Luxe. The countertops, which I had originally left in butcher block to preserve the warmth of the cabin's original charm, had been replaced with smooth, cold slabs of quartz, white, with faint gray veining, uniform and soulless. The antique brass handles I'd scavenged from estate sales had been swapped for matte black bars that looked like they belonged in some overpriced downtown condo. Even the layout was different. My pot rack, gone. My spice shelf, ripped out and replaced with a closed cabinet. She'd knocked down the small divider wall that separated the kitchen from the dining area to open it up, which completely destroyed the cozy, enclosed feel I had worked so hard to preserve. The farmhouse sink was still there, but the faucet had been replaced with some ridiculous black gooseneck monstrosity that looked like it had been yanked out of a high-end bakery. "I know, right?" Emily said, stepping beside me, her smile so wide it looked painful. "It's amazing. I've been dying to show you. Don't worry, I documented the whole process. There are videos and everything. Even thought about starting a YouTube channel for it." I was staring, but I wasn't seeing. My hands hung uselessly at my sides, my jaw locked in disbelief. I stepped forward slowly, like I was approaching the wreckage of a car crash. The tile, hexagonal, pearl-toned, was brand new. The lighting fixtures overhead were trendy and industrial, replacing the simple pendant bulbs I had installed myself. The wooden beams above the stove had been painted over. Painted? She had painted over the exposed reclaimed wood beams. My voice came out like gravel. "What the hell did you do?" She blinked at me like I was the one being unreasonable. "I renovated," she said brightly, turning to open one of the drawers. "Soft close everything. Look, no slam." I didn't move. I couldn't. My brain was still trying to process how she had touched, altered, and erased something so personal, so deliberate. The kitchen had been the heart of the cabin. My grandmother and I used to make cinnamon rolls in that kitchen every Christmas when I was a child. Those pine cabinets had held her mismatched mugs, her little collection of chipped recipe cards, and the ceramic mixing bowls she never replaced because they still worked just fine. Every detail had been chosen with care. It was supposed to stay rooted in memory. Instead, it now looked like something yanked out of a showroom catalog. "You destroyed it," I said quietly. "You destroyed everything." Emily raised an eyebrow. "I upgraded it. You should be thanking me." I turned to her slowly, and that's when she dropped the next bomb, like it was nothing. "It cost 55 grand. Well, 55 and some change, but I rounded down. Still not bad, considering how much value it adds to the place, especially up here in the mountains. This kind of kitchen? It practically pays for itself." For a few seconds, I genuinely thought I was going to black out. "You spent $55,000? I said, the words barely registering as I spoke them. "On my kitchen?" "Our kitchen," she said too quickly, then corrected herself. "Well, yours. But I mean, I was staying here, and it was so dated. You had those old wood cabinets, and the layout was super cramped. You couldn't even open the dishwasher and the drawer at the same time. It needed to be modernized." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't feel my hands. My voice trembled. How did you even pay for this?" She sipped her coffee again, casual as ever. "Oh, I used your Amex. And the Chase card. And I think one of the Home Depot ones too. Don't worry, I kept all the receipts." I snapped my head toward her so fast my neck cracked. "You used my credit cards?" She looked almost offended at my tone. "Well, yeah. It's not like I had the cash just sitting around. Besides, you're doing fine, Rachel. You work overseas. You make, what, 6 figures? You can handle it. And think of it this way, this is technically an investment. You'll thank me when you sell." I could feel my pulse thudding behind my eyes. My chest was so tight it hurt. "You think I'm selling this place?" I asked, stunned. She laughed, genuinely confused. "Well, not now. But eventually, right? I mean, this place was cute, but it was rustic. Now it has real market appeal." I had never in my life wanted to scream at someone the way I did right then. My entire body was shaking, my hands clenched so tightly I could feel my nails digging into my palms. She had stolen my money. Stolen it. Not just money, but memories. Choices. Identity. And she was standing there smiling at me like she'd just given me a birthday present. "I restored those cabinets with my own hands," I said, my voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. "I spent hours working on them. They were original. They were our grandmother's. And you ripped them out and threw them away like trash." Emily frowned, as if only now realizing I wasn't going to applaud her. They were outdated, Rachel. They had to go. You were emotionally attached to something that didn't function anymore. That's not healthy. I turned away, afraid of what I might say, or do, if I kept looking at her face. My entire body felt like it was being compressed in a vice. I reached for the counter to steady myself, but even the cool quartz under my fingers made me feel sick. I didn't recognize this place anymore. Not a single inch of it. She'd stripped it clean of its past and turned it into something I would have never chosen, then saddled me with a 5-figure bill and expected gratitude. You need to leave, I said, forcing the words out with all the control I could muster.
Now. Today.
Pack whatever you have left and get out of my house. Emily scoffed. Are you serious? After everything I did for this place? Everything you did, I spat, rounding on her, was for yourself. You vandalized my home, maxed out my credit cards, and stood here trying to gaslight me into thinking it was a favor. You are delusional. For a brief second, her expression cracked. She wasn't smiling anymore. But she didn't apologize. She didn't even look ashamed. She just looked insulted. Like I was the one being unreasonable. I didn't wait for another word. I walked out of that kitchen, what used to be my kitchen, and into the living room, each step heavier than the last, the silence behind me louder than any screaming match we could have had. And with each breath, the sick, twisted truth sank deeper into my gut. She had crossed a line I didn't even know existed. And now there was no going back. I didn't even make it halfway down the hallway before I heard her footsteps behind me, quick and irritated, the slap of her bare feet on the hardwood matching the frantic edge in her voice as she followed me. Rachel, stop, she said, as if she had any right to ask me for anything. I didn't stop. I kept walking until I reached the living room, where I turned on my heel so fast she nearly collided with me. My pulse was pounding in my throat, but beneath the anger and shock there was something colder settling in, something sharp and steady. I had the feeling, deep, instinctive, that the kitchen fiasco wasn't the end of it. It wasn't even close. Emily stood in front of me, arms crossed tight, jaw set in the stubborn way she used to look when she was 12 and got caught lying about stealing money from our mother's purse. But this time her eyes weren't ashamed or guilty. They were resentful, bitter, like she was the one who'd been wronged. You're overreacting, she said, lifting her chin. It's not that big of a deal. The cabin belongs to both of us. We're family. We're supposed to share things. I felt the air leave my lungs in one slow, measured exhale. No, I said, each word deliberate. The cabin belongs to me. I bought it with my inheritance. Grandma left money to me, not to both of us.
Not equally. Not as a shared family dream. To me.
This is my property. She rolled her eyes. Actually rolled them. That's so typical, she muttered. You always think everything is yours. Because this is mine, I snapped, the edge breaking through. I restored this cabin. I maintained it. I paid every bill, every repair, every piece of furniture in it. You don't get to rewrite reality because you showed up here when you were desperate. Emily folded her arms deeper, her face twisting into something I hardly recognized. You don't understand what it's like, she said, her voice starting to shake in that calculated way she used when she wanted pity. You've always had everything handed to you. Good grades, good jobs, money, opportunities, grandma's approval, everything. And I got nothing. I've always been the one struggling. I stared at her, stunned at the audacity, the complete detachment from facts. You think I had everything handed to me? Emily, I worked 2 jobs through college. I took night shifts at the hospital to get my degree. I've been out of the country for almost a year working 14-hour days. I didn't inherit this cabin. I bought it with what Grandma left me because she trusted me to take care of something. Because she knew I would. Exactly, she said, like she'd proven some point. She loved you more. She always did. She always talked about how responsible you were, how proud she was. I never got that. You don't know how that feels. And now you have this perfect little life and this whole cabin, and I have nothing. You owe me, Rachel. Family owes family. I stepped closer. So close, she had to tilt her head back to look at me. Family does not mean I let you steal from me. Her jaw tightened.
She didn't respond.
That silence was all the answer I needed. I moved toward the desk in the corner where I kept my mail and laptop, something compelling me to check it, to see how deep this went. When I pulled the top drawer open, I saw instantly what was missing. My file folder. The one labeled taxes and accounts. The one I kept locked when I wasn't here. The one that held copies of my W-2s, old bank statements, and the notarized documents tied to my inheritance. It was gone. My entire body went cold. "Where is it?" I asked. Emily didn't answer. "Where the hell is my financial folder?" I repeated, louder, sharper, and she finally flinched. "I used it," she said quietly, like she was admitting to borrowing a sweater without asking. "I needed some of your information for the loan." The room tilted. "What loan?" She swallowed and looked away, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear like that would somehow soften what she was saying. "The renovation loan. And a couple of smaller ones. And the store cards." Look, I didn't have a choice. They needed verification, and I didn't have the credit for it. I stared at her, and for a moment there was no anger, no yelling, no shock. Just a terrifying, hollow numbness. "You used my identity," I said slowly. "You committed fraud." She stiffened. "Don't say it like that. That's what it is." "It wasn't fraud," she insisted, her voice rising, panicked but defensive. "I didn't pretend to be you. I just used your numbers. And your credit. And your name sometimes. You weren't here. You weren't using it. And it was for something that benefits us both." "Us." I nearly laughed. "There is no us here. You stole from me." "I didn't steal," she said, putting her hands on her hips. "I borrowed. And you can afford it. You make more in a month than I've made in the last year. This doesn't even hurt you." I felt my nails digging into my palms again, deep enough to sting. "You have no idea what I can or can't afford." "Yes, I do," she shot back, raising her chin. "I saw the numbers. Your salary. Your bonus. Your savings. Everything. You're doing fine, Rachel. You don't need to hoard everything." My breath caught in my throat. "You went through my accounts." She had the nerve to shrug. I needed to understand the situation. "The situation," I repeated, barely recognizing my own voice now, "is that you stole my identity, racked up debt in my name, maxed out my cards, opened accounts I never approved, and remodeled my house without my permission." She looked at me like I was being unreasonable. "It's not like you were going to use the cards while you were gone. And this place was outdated. I actually helped you." "Helped me," I whispered, my voice filled with disbelief, so potent it hurt. "You think this is helping?" "You're being dramatic," she said, arms crossed again, chin lifted. "You've always been dramatic. You always make everything into some disaster. I improved your life. The cabin looks great. Your credit can handle it. You'll be fine." I took a step back from her because for the first time, I wasn't just furious. I was afraid of her, of the way she believed her own excuses, of how easily she twisted reality until she was the victim, the hero, and the one owed something, all at once. Of how effortlessly she justified destroying parts of my life because she felt entitled to them. "You need to pack," I said, my voice low, steady, unshakable now. "You need to pack everything. You are leaving this house today." Emily's face twisted, offended, wounded, furious all at once. "You can't just throw me out. I live here." "You never lived here," I said. "You occupied it. You stole it. And now you're going." She opened her mouth to argue again, but I cut her off. "And when you walk out that door, Emily, you're going to explain everything to the police." Her expression collapsed in an instant. Shock, fear, denial. I didn't look away. I couldn't, because the truth had finally settled in with absolute clarity. This wasn't just entitlement. This was theft, fraud, manipulation, delusion. And she wasn't sorry. Not even a little. The silence after our last exchange didn't last long. I walked away from her and straight into what used to be my office, a small sunlit room at the back of the cabin that I had carefully kept organized with a desk, my old laptop, file storage, and a small safe tucked beneath a handmade bookshelf. I didn't say anything else as I opened the laptop and pulled up my bank accounts one by one. I wasn't sure what I expected to find. Maybe just confirmation of the $55,000 Emily claimed she spent on the kitchen remodel, but the moment I logged in, my blood ran cold. The first account had been drained almost entirely. Not just a few thousand. We were talking tens. My savings account, the one I had been building slowly since college, was missing over $20,000. I clicked to view transactions, and it was like watching a car crash in slow motion. Spa Luxe in Aspen. A boutique hotel reservation under my name with a two-night bill of $2,400, luxury appliance orders from stores I'd never even heard of. a Dyson hair system, $1,000 espresso machine, a new refrigerator that wasn't even here. It had been shipped to another address, which I later realized was a storage unit in Boulder. There was also an entire leather furniture set, not even from a major retailer but custom-made from some design studio in Utah. I kept scrolling, my hand shaking on the mouse. An order for a 6-person hot tub. Installation fees. Deck modification work. Another payment to a landscaping company for spa-style Serenity design. That one really stood out. She had used my identity, my money, my name, and paid someone thousands of dollars to turn my cabin into her fantasy retreat. The running total, across all cards, loans, and accounts, easily exceeded $90,000. $90,000. And the worst part was knowing that I hadn't even uncovered it all yet. Who knew what was tied to accounts I hadn't even remembered to check, or what she'd opened in my name that I hadn't yet discovered? I stood up slowly, heart thundering in my chest, and walked back into the kitchen. She was still there, sitting on one of the new bar stools she'd apparently purchased as part of her vision. She looked up when I entered and clearly saw something in my face that made her pause. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. My voice was calm, deadly, and cold enough to make her shift in her seat. "It's 90,000, I said. "And climbing." Her eyes darted away. "What is?" "The money you've stolen from me." She sighed heavily, like this was exhausting for her. "Rachel, you're blowing this out of proportion." "Out of proportion?" I moved closer, not to intimidate her, but because I needed her to look me in the eye when she heard what was coming next. "You used my credit, my name, my accounts. You forged my information. You bought a hot tub." "A hot tub, Emily. You paid for spa treatments, resort getaways, high-end furniture, and God knows what else, all while living in my home like some delusional squatter." Her face changed again, shifting from guilt to irritation in the space of a breath. "Okay, yes, maybe I went a little overboard. But I told you I was going through a hard time, and I thought you'd understand eventually." "No," I said firmly. "You thought I wouldn't find out. You thought I'd stay overseas another year, maybe 2, and that by the time I came back, you'd have rooted yourself so deeply here that I wouldn't be able to undo it." She said nothing. The silence spoke volumes. "I'm giving you 3 hours, I said, and this time, my voice did shake, but not from fear.
3.
You pack everything you own, you take the SUV you leased with my name on the paperwork, and you leave. If you're still here when the clock runs out, I'm calling the police, and I will file charges for identity theft, credit card fraud, and trespassing." Her mouth fell open. "You can't do that. I live here." "No, you stayed here. Illegally. Without a lease. Without my permission. While committing financial fraud." She stood up, eyes wide, panic rising in her voice. "I've been here more than a month. That gives me tenant rights." I stared at her for a long moment. "You really think that's going to protect you?" "It's the law," she said, arms crossed again, but her tone faltered. "You can't just kick me out without an eviction notice. I've been living here. I get mail here. You open credit lines in my name. That's not tenancy. That's a felony. You want to fight this in court?
Fine.
But the second I dial the sheriff's office, you'll be in handcuffs before the coffee gets cold." She stared at me, her face contorting again, like she couldn't decide whether to cry or scream. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling for the county sheriff's number. 3 hours. That's generous, all things considered. "I can't just leave," she said, her voice rising, desperate now. "Where would I go? I don't have money. I don't have anywhere." "Maybe you should have thought of that before you spent 90 grand that didn't belong to you," I said. "You had chances to stop. You had chances to come clean. You didn't." She didn't respond, just stood there staring at me, her arms slack at her sides, and for a moment she looked truly small, like a child caught lying and still trying to figure out how to lie her way out of it. But I didn't care. Not anymore. I turned and walked away, phone still in hand, adrenaline buzzing in my veins like ice water. I was done waiting for her to show remorse. The clock had started. The drive into town was quiet, too quiet, except for the constant churn of thoughts in my head. It felt like my mind was chewing through concrete. Every turn of the mountain road brought me further away from the wreckage of my own home, and closer to what I hoped would be a point of control, of resolution. The night before had been a blur. After I gave Emily the ultimatum, I locked my bedroom door, turned off the lights, and sat with my back against the wall like I was guarding a war zone. I barely slept. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't stop cataloging every violation. Every missing dollar. Every cabinet ripped out. Every bold, manipulative lie she had told while wearing my clothes and drinking my coffee. I met with the attorney at a small private firm downtown, recommended by a friend of a friend. The office was modest, all dark wood and soft lighting, but the woman sitting behind the desk, Lorraine Richter, was anything but soft. She was in her late 50s, crisp gray suit, her posture perfect, and when I laid out the situation, she didn't blink. She just listened, calm and methodical, taking notes while I explained everything in order. The unauthorized remodel, the stolen financial folder, the forged credit lines, the accounts drained, and the nearly $100,000 in damages. I had printed out statements, screenshots, and timelines. I had spent hours combing through everything with surgical precision, documenting every charge, every purchase, every vendor. When I finished, she set her pen down, steepled her fingers, and said with unnerving composure, "You have a solid case for felony identity theft, wire fraud, unauthorized use of financial instruments, and property conversion. Possibly even elder fraud if we connect it to misuse of your inheritance. This is serious, Rachel. Very serious." I nodded, but it didn't bring any relief. It only deepened the nausea, sitting heavy in my chest. "We'll begin by drafting formal charges," Lorraine continued. "We'll need statements from contractors and vendors, anyone who worked on the remodel or delivered appliances under your name. If we can track those invoices and confirm that Emily signed or accepted them, even better. Do you have surveillance? Cameras?" I hesitated. "Only the back porch and driveway." Motion triggered. I didn't think I needed anything inside. "Get the footage," she said, not missing a beat. "Everything. The comings and goings. Delivery trucks. Anyone entering the property. That's evidence." I nodded again and made a note. "We'll also notify your banks and credit providers immediately. Have you filed fraud disputes?" "I froze my accounts this morning. Locked my credit reports. But no, not yet. I didn't want to mess anything up legally before speaking with you." "Good instinct," she said. "We'll handle the disputes carefully. You'll file affidavits on each instance. Expect it to take months, but you'll get it back. Not without a fight, though."
She paused.
"You need to prepare yourself. This won't be clean. If your sister decides to dig in her heels or claim emotional hardship, it could drag out. But make no mistake, she's committed multiple felonies. And if we want to press charges, we can." I looked down at my hands, fingers twisting the hem of my sweater. I hadn't cried. Not yet. I didn't even feel close. There was something so clean about the cold rage that had settled in me, like I had burned through everything else and only focus remained. But I wasn't prepared for what happened next. It was later that evening, after I returned to the cabin and confirmed that Emily was gone. She had packed up during my appointment and left without a word. The SUV was gone. The kitchen was still a gutted, showroom parody of itself. The hot tub installation was halfway finished, a crater of torn decking and unconnected pipes yawning from the side of the porch like an open wound. I was documenting it all for evidence when my phone buzzed. It was my mother. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. I hadn't told her anything yet, not formally, not directly. I didn't want to involve her until I had everything lined up. But apparently Emily had beaten me to it. I answered. "Hello." "Rachel," she said immediately, her voice brittle, clipped with judgment. "What are you doing?" "What do you mean? What am I doing?" "I just got off the phone with your sister. She's crying. She says you threw her out without warning. She says she's homeless." The words hit harder than I expected. I closed my eyes, jaw clenched. "She stole from me, Mom. Nearly $100,000. She used my identity to take out loans, max out credit cards, renovate my house, without permission, and she forged my information to do it. She told me you left the cabin empty for almost a year," my mother said, ignoring the rest entirely. "She said she was taking care of it for you, that she was trying to fix it up. She said you were always the favorite, that you've always had more." "She broke the law," I said, louder now. "This isn't about favoritism or who has more. She committed crimes. Multiple. She ruined my finances. She violated every boundary I had. She's your sister," my mother snapped, like that excused everything. "She's a criminal," I said, and that word tasted like glass in my mouth. "And I am not going to let her destroy what I built because she feels entitled to it." There was a pause on the other end. Then, "You've always been so cold." My stomach turned cold. I said, breathless. I've supported her for years, covered her bills, helped her with rent, gave her second, third, 10th chances. And she repaid me by stealing my identity, blowing my savings, and making herself at home in the only place I've ever felt safe. And I'm the cold one. She's living in her car, my mother said, as if that made her actions disappear. What do you want me to do? Just turn my back on her? No, I said quietly. But don't expect me to protect her from the consequences. There was nothing more to say. I ended the call before the rising tide of anger drowned whatever sliver of sympathy I still had left. I stood in the middle of my ruined kitchen, my phone clenched so tightly in my hand that my knuckles ached. I could still smell the paint from the new cabinets, that cold chemical sharpness that clashed with every memory this place once held. Emily was gone, but the damage remained. Now it was time to clean up the wreckage and take back what she tried to steal. All of it. I thought I had seen the worst of it. After everything I had uncovered, after watching my bank accounts empty, my property gutted, and my identity twisted into a credit-fueled nightmare, I believed the bleeding had to stop somewhere. I thought once Emily was out of my house and I had locked down every account, frozen every credit line, filed disputes, and retained legal counsel, I could start clawing my way back to solid ground. But then I pulled my full credit reports. All 3 bureaus. Every line item. Every closed and open account. Every inquiry. I sat down at the old kitchen table, which she hadn't replaced, somehow, and pored over the files like a forensic accountant on a crime show, except this wasn't a show. This was my life, laid bare in transactions and dates and dollar signs that didn't make any sense until they did. It started with a department store card from 2017, opened under my name, but sent to an address I didn't recognize. Then a second card, different bank, similar setup. By the time I found the third, I could barely breathe. None of these were new. These weren't part of the recent wave of damage tied to the remodel, or the spa packages, or the hot tub installation. This had been going on for years. She had opened multiple credit cards in my name, stretching back 6, maybe even 7 years. Small balances at first. Carefully paid down just enough to avoid flags. Like she had tested the boundaries of the system. Like she'd been practicing. Then came the loan, $15,000, originating in 2020, mid-pandemic, at a time when I was swamped in hospital trial work overseas and barely checking my mail. The payments had started on schedule and then tapered off 6 months later. Eventually, it was sent to collections. I had never seen it. I had never even heard of the lender. But there it was on my report in black and white. Defaulted. Delinquent. Unpaid. I sat completely still for several minutes, staring at the screen, the numbers, the timelines.
My mouth was dry.
My hands trembled. Every time I thought I'd uncovered the last of it, something darker slithered out from beneath the surface. It wasn't just fraud anymore. It wasn't just desperation, impulse, or some chaotic unraveling of a failing sibling. This wasn't a single betrayal, or even a string of bad decisions. This was systematic. Premeditated. She had been doing this for years behind my back, using my identity like a second skin. When I showed the documents to Lorraine, my attorney, she didn't even blink. She took the printouts from me, calmly pulled out a yellow legal pad, and began writing. Line by line. Tallying the damages. Reviewing the evidence. Her pen didn't stop moving for nearly 20 minutes. The total, she said finally, is now sitting at $134,219. Not including interest, fees, or punitive damages. I stared at the figure, my stomach roiling. This was never about one mistake. She's been doing this behind my back for almost a decade. Lorraine nodded, her voice dry. Which means we're filing a civil suit immediately. I'll get the paperwork started today. You'll sue for damages, fraud, emotional distress, and restitution. We'll attach a lien to any property she holds or income she earns in the future. But I'm going to be honest, most of it won't come back to you. I already knew that. Emily didn't have money. She never had. But it wasn't about the repayment. Not anymore. It was about truth. It was about putting a legal wall between her and my life so she could never do this again. Lorraine continued, her tone shifting into something harder. As for the criminal side, I've sent everything to the district attorney's office. The paper trail is airtight. This qualifies as felony-level identity theft in multiple instances. The loan alone is enough for a case. Add the forged credit accounts, the unauthorized purchases, the forged signatures. This is beyond negotiation. She looked me in the eye, steady and clear. Charges are coming. It's not a matter of if, it's when. The room was quiet. I stared out her office window at the gray sky, the edges of the town disappearing into mist. My chest ached, not from the legal weight of it, but from something older.
Deeper.
I thought about all the times I had bailed Emily out of some half-baked disaster. The calls late at night when she needed help with rent. The time I co-signed for her car, the same car she abandoned when the payments became too much. The countless family dinners where I made excuses for her, explained away her failures, reassured our mother that she just needed more time. I had defended her for years, believed her, trusted her. And all that time, she had been quietly building a second life with my name on it. What I felt wasn't grief. It wasn't even rage anymore. It was something colder. A final, irreversible break between us that couldn't be undone with apologies or excuses, or even punishment. This wasn't just about money. It was about the years she stole from me without ever being caught. And now that she was, I would make sure she never touched another piece of my life again. I got the call on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting in my car outside the post office, watching a line of tourists fumble with a self-service kiosk while trying to convince myself to go inside, when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I answered it anyway. The woman on the other end identified herself as a detective from the Boulder County Sheriff's Office. Her voice was measured and practiced, the kind that has said the same line dozens of times before. "We've taken your sister, Emily Caldwell, into custody this morning," she said, "in connection with your ongoing identity theft and fraud case." She was located at a residence in Lyons, staying with her boyfriend. "We recovered additional materials, documents, financial paperwork, and 3 unopened credit cards in your name. They were in her bag." I felt my heart slow down in my chest. Not speed up. Slow down. Like the weight of it had finally reached equilibrium with gravity. I thanked the detective, asked a few questions I already knew the answers to, and then just sat there, keys in my hand, watching people come and go through the glass doors as if the world hadn't just shifted again. The arraignment was scheduled for the next morning. I didn't have to go, but Lorraine encouraged it.
"Be present," she said.
"It reminds everyone that there's a real victim. And it reminds you that this is real, that it's being handled." So I went. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Thin gray carpet, hard plastic seating, everything sterile and slightly fluorescent like a hospital waiting room. Emily was brought in through the side entrance, her wrists cuffed loosely in front of her, her expression stiff and unreadable. Her hair was tied back, her face bare of makeup. I couldn't tell if she saw me when she entered. I didn't care if she did. The judge read the charges: 5 counts of felony identity theft, 3 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of financial exploitation, and an open investigation on possible additional charges tied to misuse of federal funds from the pandemic-era loan. I sat motionless while the clerk listed them off, my hands folded tightly in my lap. When the judge asked for her plea, Emily's voice came out clear and rehearsed. "Not guilty." I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I just stared at the back of her head and waited for it to be over. It wasn't until I stepped out into the hallway, away from the courtroom's forced calm, that I saw her, my mother, sitting in one of the chairs by the elevator. She looked small, her coat wrapped tightly around her even though it wasn't cold, her purse clenched on her lap like it might fly away.
She didn't look at me.
I didn't go to her. By the time I got back to my car, the messages had already started. Text after text, all from her. At first calm, then frantic, then vicious. "You didn't have to do this. She's your sister. How can you sleep at night knowing you've put her in jail? You've destroyed this family. I hope you're happy now." There were voicemails too, though I didn't listen to them. I didn't need to. I could hear the tone already.
The sighs.
The disappointment. The subtle digs wrapped in the language of concern. And beneath it all, the same unspoken message I had heard since childhood. "Emily is broken, so you have to be the strong one. You have to fix it. Absorb it.
Carry it."
Not this time. I opened my messages, selected them all, and hit block. My mother. My sister. Any number I didn't know. Silence. Then I opened my phone settings and did something I'd never done before. I turned on the Do Not Disturb mode and set it to stay on indefinitely. I didn't want to be reachable. Not today. Not to anyone still pretending that my grief was somehow less real because it came dressed as resolve. When I got home, the cabin felt quieter than usual. But not empty. Not hollow. Just still. Like it was waiting. I sat down at the kitchen table, the one thing Emily hadn't changed, and opened my notebook. I made a list. Itemized every charge, every report, every point of contact in the case. I wasn't doing it out of obsession anymore. I was doing it to reclaim control. This wasn't about revenge. It was about the truth. About showing up for myself the way no one else ever had. The damage was real. So was the betrayal. But so was my voice. And for the first time in years, I wasn't letting anyone talk over it. I had hoped, naively, that once she was out of the cabin and in custody, the damage would plateau, that maybe, finally, I'd seen the worst of it. But Emily, it turned out, had one final act left in her. Something not just cruel, but calculated in that uniquely personal way she had of turning everything she touched into a statement. A message. A war declaration disguised as a breakdown. It started with the jewelry. I hadn't noticed it was missing at first. Not until I went into the small safe tucked in the back of my bedroom closet, where I kept what few things of real sentimental value I still owned. My grandmother's locket. The thin gold bracelet I'd been given when I graduated from nursing school. A watch that belonged to my father. All gone. The safe hadn't been forced open, but the combination had been reset. And there was no sign of the items anywhere else in the house. She had taken them before she left. Then it was the bedroom itself. At first glance, it looked untouched, like the rest of the cabin. Still, clean, unassuming. But once I opened the drawers, the truth came fast and ugly. My clothes had been torn. Not all of them, just enough to send a message. The cashmere sweater I'd saved for over a year to afford, the tailored wool coat from my last trip abroad, even my grandmother's quilt had long gashes in the fabric, sliced through with what looked like a box cutter. The mirror above the dresser was shattered. Not cracked, shattered. The shards had been swept into a pile in the corner of the room, deliberately, neatly, like someone cleaning up their own violence. And then there was the message. Scrawled across the bathroom mirror in smudged red lipstick, selfish. All caps. Big. Uneven. Like she'd written it with shaking hands, but wanted every letter to be unmistakably clear. In the top drawer of the bathroom vanity, folded and waiting like it had been left for me to find, was the letter. I hesitated before opening it. I don't know why I expected something different, maybe a confession, or, at the very least, an apology. But of course, it was neither. She had written pages, front and back, in looping script I recognized from old birthday cards and high school notes she used to leave on my bed. But now it was poisoned, turned into a performance of self-pity and manipulation, so intense it read like a script. She blamed me for everything. For her eviction, her arrest, her humiliation. For never sharing what I had, for always being the one who made her feel small. She called the charges an overreaction. She claimed I had twisted the narrative and painted her as a monster. She said I was cold, that I was obsessed with control, that I had destroyed the only family I had left. At the bottom of the letter, in handwriting that slanted downward like a spiral, she wrote, "You turned your back on me when I needed you most. I hope it was worth it." I folded the letter back up, placed it in a plastic sleeve, and added it to the file I kept for Lorraine. Because while Emily had been playing out her emotional theatrics in lipstick and torn fabric, the real war was unfolding in court. And there, she couldn't twist the story with tone or tear-stained paper. There, the evidence spoke louder than she ever could. The contractor testimonies had started rolling in. One after another, statements detailing the remodel work she requested, the payments she made using my name, the forged signatures on approval forms. One of them even remembered asking her about a financial form that didn't match the rest of the documents. She had waved it off, said she had 2 legal names because of a passport issue. It was a lie delivered so casually, so confidently, that the man didn't question it again. Then came the video footage. Motion-activated clips from the back porch and driveway. Emily unloading deliveries, signing for packages, wheeling in boxes of tile and cabinetry under the name Rachel Caldwell. Her boyfriend helping carry in appliances. Her talking on the phone, loudly repeating personal financial details, my details. Social security number. Bank routing info. Spelling out my name phonetically. I watched it frame by frame, hands cold and steady, as the prosecution quietly built the kind of case most victims never get. Concrete. Documented. Ironclad. Lorraine had already looped in a specialist for the deed forgery. Yes, because, as if the credit cards and the remodel and the theft weren't enough, Emily had filed fake property records, attempting to shift partial ownership of the cabin into her name. They were poorly forged, full of legal inconsistencies and notary fraud, but they existed. And she had submitted them to a third-party document recorder in another state to avoid detection. It was systematic, calculated, intentional. And with every new piece of evidence, every email from Lorraine, every signature matched to my stolen documents, the narrative grew louder, sharper, undeniable. She hadn't broken down. She hadn't spiraled.
She had planned this.
And the lipstick on the mirror? The letter? The clothes she slashed? That was just the finale. A tantrum dressed up as grief, after she realized she couldn't control the narrative anymore. I didn't cry. Not even then. I boxed up what she hadn't stolen. I saved the mirror message as evidence. I contacted the insurance company about the damaged items. I walked room to room and wrote down everything that was still missing: silver picture frames, a vintage pendant lamp, even 2 bottles of rare wine from a locked cabinet in the basement.
Gone.
Probably sold.
Pawned.
Spent. And then I sent Lorraine a message. Proceed with everything. Because this wasn't just about stolen money anymore. This was about taking back every piece of myself she had tried to wear like a mask, and then burn. The trial lasted 6 days, but it felt like a year carved out of my life. Every morning I sat at the plaintiff's table with my attorney, watching as my sister was led in through the same side door in the same shapeless county-issued clothes, her wrists unshackled for appearances, but her posture heavy with the weight of consequence. Emily looked smaller somehow, tired, maybe, or simply stripped of the confident entitlement she had worn so effortlessly for so long. But even then, in a courtroom packed with evidence of everything she had done, she never once looked at me with real remorse. Not in the way that mattered. The prosecution came in sharp and unrelenting. They opened with a quiet confidence that bordered on surgical precision. They laid out a timeline with timestamps, invoices, recorded deliveries, credit card statements, and surveillance footage. They entered photos into evidence: luxury furniture sitting in my driveway, spa receipts signed in my name, the gutted kitchen before and after, side-by-side comparisons of my forged signature versus my real one. One by one, contractors and delivery personnel testified.
Some had assumed she was me.
Others admitted she had used different names but insisted the owner had given verbal permission. It didn't matter. My name, my money, my cabin, my signature. Every line she crossed was mapped, dated, and reinforced with physical documentation. When it was the defense's turn, they fumbled. They tried to paint her as overwhelmed, emotionally distressed, a struggling younger sibling who had simply made a string of desperate mistakes. Her lawyer leaned heavily into the narrative of family and context. He emphasized how long we'd known each other, how close we had once been, how fraught her financial life had become. He even tried to suggest that, at some point, I may have given her verbal access to some of the funds, which I countered with years of written proof that I had never shared a single financial login with her. Then came her apology. It wasn't really an apology. It was a forced statement, read from a crumpled piece of paper she'd pulled from her lap. Her voice cracked in rehearsed places. She said she was sorry for the pain she caused and that things had gotten out of hand. She said she never meant to hurt me, but not once did she acknowledge the damage with specificity. Not once did she take full responsibility. It was like she was performing regret for the sake of optics, hoping it might shave a year or 2 off her sentence. And then, on the 5th day, it was my turn to speak. I stood behind the wooden podium with a statement I had rewritten a dozen times in the weeks leading up to the trial, but when I opened my mouth, I barely needed it. The words were there, sharp, clear, full. I told them what it felt like to come home and find my life rearranged by someone who had called herself family. I explained the exhaustion of discovering the betrayal wasn't recent or isolated, but systemic, long-term, predatory. I detailed the financial damage. $132 for 72 spread across forged credit lines, unpaid loans, unauthorized remodels, stolen property, and then I told them what can't be added up in numbers. The erosion of trust. The sleepless nights. The sense of being hollowed out from the inside because someone I loved had looked at my life and seen a resource to plunder. I told them how I had been made to feel like the villain in my own story, how my mother had blamed me, how the people closest to us had called me unforgiving because I wouldn't let theft go unchecked. I said, clearly, finally, forgiveness is not the same as immunity. The courtroom was silent when I stepped down. Even Emily looked frozen, her mouth tight, her hands limp in her lap. I don't know if she was surprised or if she simply realized for the first time that I wasn't going to back down, that there was no version of this where I walked away quietly. On the 6th day, the The jury returned. It took them less than 4 hours.
Guilty.
On all counts. The judge was firm, his tone stripped of sympathy. He read the sentence with finality: 6 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation, and full restitution to be paid to me in the amount of $132,472. He made it clear that the severity of the sentence reflected the length and sophistication of the fraud, the breach of familial trust, and the emotional harm done in parallel with the financial devastation. This wasn't a petty crime. It was calculated, repeated theft. It was identity abuse. And now it had a consequence. I sat there quietly while the sentence was read, my hands folded in my lap, my breathing steady.
I didn't cry.
I didn't smile. I didn't turn to look at her as she was led away, even when I felt her eyes on me. I didn't need to, because it was over. Not the healing. That would take longer. Maybe forever. But the spiral, the manipulation, the steady invasion of every part of my life, that was over now. There was a line in the sand, drawn in public record, witnessed by a court, sealed in law. And I hadn't been the one to cross it. I had simply made sure it held. The silence from most of my family came quickly after the sentencing, not in a storm of confrontation or argument, but in a slow, steady closing of doors. No dramatic phone calls, no impassioned pleas for reconciliation. Just silence. Invitations stopped arriving. Group texts stopped buzzing. My cousin's wedding came and went without a word. Christmas plans were quietly shifted to someone else's house, one I was never told about. People who had once forwarded memes and shared holiday recipes simply vanished from my life. At first, it was disorienting. Then it was clarifying. I learned through a mutual relative that my mother had been telling everyone I turned on family, that I had been cruel and obsessed with control, that I chose money over blood. There were others, too, cousins I had grown up beside, aunts who once called me their second daughter, who didn't say much but chose to remain neutral, which, in a situation like this, is just another kind of betrayal. There is no neutral position when someone has stolen your identity, your savings, your peace, and weaponized your trust. I stopped explaining myself. I didn't write a letter, didn't call to defend my decisions. The courtroom had heard the truth. The law had responded. And that was enough. What saved me in those first few hollow months was not blood, but loyalty, the kind that doesn't ask you to shrink to stay connected. Teresa, my best friend since college, was there from the first moment I came home to the wreckage. She came up to the mountains without being asked, with a trunk full of groceries and a stack of clean towels, and stayed 2 nights with me while I cataloged the damage. She didn't tell me to forgive. She didn't try to fix it. She just stayed and listened and helped scrub the smudged lipstick from the mirror like it was any other chore. No judgment, no pity. And then there was my great-aunt Lorraine, my grandmother's sister. She was already well into her 80s, living in a retirement community in Arizona, but when she found out what happened, she called me. Her voice was thin and trembling, but her words were sharp. "Rachel, your grandmother would have stood exactly where you're standing. Don't let anyone rewrite this. You did the right thing." She sent me a handwritten letter a week later, the kind no one sends anymore. Inside was a folded photograph of me at 14, standing between her and Grandma in front of the cabin, holding a toolbox almost too big for my arms. It was the summer I learned how to refinish wood, the summer I sanded the cabinets that Emily later ripped out. I kept that photo taped to my fridge for months. The cabin took time. Longer than I expected. The kitchen was the first thing I tackled, not with contractors or designers, but on my own terms. I had the quartz countertops removed. The white cabinets were sold to a local family who loved the modern rustic look, and I didn't stop them. They weren't cursed objects. They just didn't belong to me. I tracked down a salvage yard that still had aged pine cabinets from the same decade my originals were built. They weren't exact, but they were close enough, and they bore the right kind of imperfections. I installed them myself with a friend's help.
Slowly.
Methodically. Every nail, every hinge, every choice mine. I changed the locks. On every door, not just the front. I added a new security system, installed motion sensors inside the cabin, and placed cameras in every room that mattered. It wasn't paranoia.
It was a boundary.
A reminder that no one would ever again cross into my life without permission. I also took stock of what couldn't be replaced. The jewelry my grandmother left me, the photo albums Emily had thrown out in a fit of anger, the notebooks filled with travel logs from my first year abroad. I cried exactly once, sitting on the bedroom floor surrounded by the few things that had survived. But even then, I didn't break. I let the grief come, let it pass through me like wind through broken windows. I wasn't destroyed.
Just changed.
My finances took longer to repair. The fraud dispute process dragged on for months. Some banks were helpful. Others were cold and mechanical, like I was just another case file to sort through. But piece by piece, with Lorraine's guidance and documentation, the debts were reversed. The liens were cleared. My credit score, shattered and wounded, began to climb again, one slow digit at a time. I started keeping a notebook titled Reclaimed, where I wrote down every step forward. It wasn't for court. It wasn't for closure. It was for me. Entry 1. Filed police report. Entry 34. Replaced coat. Entry 87. Slept through the night without checking the locks. Entry 110. Cooked dinner in the new kitchen, and it felt like home again. I didn't forgive Emily. That word felt too small, too clean. What she did was not a single event.
It was a campaign.
A slow erosion of safety, love, and memory. But I did move forward. I learned how to protect what was mine, not just my home or my accounts, but my time, my energy, my voice. I no longer answer messages from anyone who demands that I justify survival. The family I lost was already broken. I just hadn't seen the fractures until I stopped pretending. And the family I kept, those few people who looked at me with love instead of expectation, was enough. More than enough. There's peace in knowing the worst has happened, and you're still standing. Still cooking in your own kitchen. Still waking up beneath a roof that no one can take from you again. Still writing down every small victory. One step at a time. One boundary at a time. Reclaimed. The first snowfall came earlier than expected that year, blanketing the trees in thick white silence, the kind that softens every edge and swallows every sound. I was sitting on the porch, my porch, finally mine again in every way, wrapped in a wool blanket with a mug of coffee cooling in my hands, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. There was no noise coming from inside the house, no strange cars parked in the drive, no manufactured chaos lurking behind a door I'd once kept open out of obligation. The quiet wasn't ominous anymore. It was earned. Every inch of this cabin had become a scar, but also a testament. The kitchen, now returned to its warm, pine-paneled glory, glowed softly in the morning light behind me. The smell of real wood and old varnish was back, subtle but grounding, like breathing through a memory that had been salvaged instead of erased. I had spent months rebuilding what was lost, not just the structure or the finances, but something harder to name. My trust in myself. My right to say no without apology. My understanding that silence in the face of harm doesn't make you good. It makes you complicit. Emily's life, as I understood it, had collapsed. The fantasy she had built around entitlement and manipulation hadn't held up in court, and without someone to prop her up, someone to lie for her, to absorb the consequences she created, there was nothing left but the truth. She was serving her sentence. She had no access to my name, my credit, my life. That part of the story had ended. But mine hadn't. The aftermath was never loud. It didn't come with sweeping gestures or clean resolutions. It was gradual, subtle. I learned how to read my bank statements without dread. I set up alerts on every account. I got comfortable telling people no, without softening the blow with excuses. I learned that boundaries weren't weapons. They were walls I built not to keep people out, but to keep myself safe inside. I stopped blaming myself for not seeing it sooner. That kind of guilt is heavy and useless, like dragging around broken glass, hoping it turns into answers. The truth was I had loved her. I had trusted her. And she had used that love as currency. She treated my silence like permission and my compassion like a loophole. That wasn't a failure on my part. That was the cost of believing the best in someone who never once gave it back. My mother and I hadn't spoken since the trial. The part of me that used to ache for her approval had gone still. I no longer reached out to explain, to defend, to correct the lies. If someone could look at what happened at the theft, the forgery, the devastation, and still ask me to be quiet for the sake of peace, then they were never protecting me. They were protecting the illusion that silence was noble. But peace, I realized, wasn't the absence of conflict. It was the presence of safety, of honesty, of knowing that everything around me had been chosen, kept, and protected by my own hand. Not inherited, not shared through guilt or forced obligation, but mine. The porch creaked slightly beneath my chair as I shifted, and I took another sip of lukewarm coffee. The sky was overcast, heavy with more snow, and the mountain stood silent and massive in the distance, unmoved by anything that had happened within these walls. There was something comforting in their indifference, a reminder that the world keeps turning, no matter who tries to rewrite your story. I didn't destroy my sister's life. I simply stopped participating in my own destruction. What I did wasn't revenge. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't about proving a point or delivering justice with a self-righteous hand. It was survival. And now, finally, it was peace.